Serum vitamin D is an unreliable biomarker of vitamin D status after acute inflammatory insult. Okay,
Oh,
one more
wow.
time. Vitamin D is an unreliable biomarker of vitamin D. Could be a cool thing too, because DHEA, yeah, it helps you get jacked, but it also helps you be smarter. Because DHEA has been demonstrated to actually protect the hippocampus
Mm.
from oxidative stress induced damage from cortisol. There is a global testosterone deficiency. People's diets suck, people's body composition sucks, and people's sedentary behavior sucks.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Neuro Experience podcast. I'm Louisa. I'm the host. If you've been following me on social media over the last few weeks, I've been speaking a lot about blood work, something that is done and has been done for so many years, and yet it is often misled, misguided, and misunderstood. Today, I am bringing Dan Garner onto the podcast. He has been dubbed as the Bloodwork Ninja. This man knows absolutely everything there is to know regarding blood work. Dan goes through and finds out the why behind every single reading, every single biomarker to get to a point of physiological potential for all of his clients. So it's quite interesting. I just had my blood work done. And normally, and you've probably felt this, you go and get your blood work done, and the physician comes back to you and says, "You're normal, you're fine, you're not dying, you don't have a disease," and they send you off. Or better yet, they say to you, "Hey, you know what? Your blood work came back and it says you have a low vitamin D. So, what I'm going to get you to do is supplement with 5,000 IUs of vitamin D." So you go over, you supplement with 5,000 IUs of vitamin D, and you don't get to the root cause. So today, Dan Garner is going to be sharing everything there is to know regarding blood work. So you must listen to this very carefully. I hope you enjoy the episode. But before we move into it, I want to remind you that all of these episodes are now on YouTube. Go through, click the link below if you want to watch this, if you're a visual learner. And if you want to ask questions, guys, go through and ask me a question at the end of this episode, or ask Dan a question on Spotify. And while you're there, please leave a written review on either Spotify or Apple iTunes. I hope this episode helps you and guides you further along your health journey. Let's get into it. Dan Garner, you have been, I don't know if you know this, but word on the street is you are known as the Bloodwork Ninja. Have you heard this?
I've heard, I've heard Bloodwork Ninja. I think Labwork Samurai. Just
Yeah.
any kind of martial artist, people tend to attach it. I think a black belt one got thrown around too. I like them all personally. I can't pick.
Yeah. I mean, I love them, and I've gone down this rabbit hole with you. I feel like, we've spoken offline. I just feel like I know you so well now, and I have so many questions because lab work and blood work is so intricate, and it gets you to know a patient in their truest form. But I think it's underutilized in clinical work, okay? B, I think it gets overridden. When you go to a doctor, for example, I mean, I'm not going to speak for every single physician, but many physicians will give you your lab work back. You've had blood work with them. They'll give you your report and say, "You're cool. You're fine," meaning you're within range. You're not dying right now. You've got no diseases. Exit out of my office. But you go much deeper than that.
Yeah, that's something where I've had to slowly develop that over the course of 10 plus years or so. I've developed my own proprietary reference ranges in the world of lab work because I found exactly what you're saying, like reference ranges being built upon population norms. So as the population continues to get more and more unhealthy, these reference ranges also continue to get more and more unhealthy. So then we end up in this situation where we have such clear U-shaped curves, like U-shaped curves with representing, say, risk factors, to where it's like the Goldilocks effect. If we have a lab marker that's too little, then your risk factor goes up. But then you have this like beautiful sweet spot of an optimal range where clearly that is where the body is designed to live. And then when a marker continues to get pressed, it U shapes its way back up to more risk factors. And you see this across anything you're looking at. You see it in uric acid. You see it in homocysteine. You're going to see it in MCV. You're going to see it in glucose. You're going to see it across every single marker. And I kept seeing this over and over and over and over again. And you just see very clear areas for optimization. And then you also just hear very clear subjective symptoms too. And I think that many people could echo the situation where their friend or their colleague said, "Hey, I have X, Y, and Z symptom." And then someone took a look at their blood work and said, "Yeah, you're fine though."
Yeah.
So yeah, and then it's like, no, I'm not. I promise I didn't come here and waste several hours to lie to you about this. I have symptoms. If it's fatigue, if it's poor sleep, if it is gastrointestinal issues, there was always something there. And there's a real like moment of learning labs where you're like, wow, this is going to take some time to truly master, but at the same time, it is the art that I want to master because it is objective. We're getting something objective, and then we're able to tie it to the subjective. That's like when you have this kind of approach to blood work, you really start to see it as an art and a science. The science of lab interpretation is like almost memorizable things. You can memorize the anatomy and physiology of certain proteins and tissues and cells and enzymes that are involved in blood work. And then a very science-based approach, but also not science, but we'll just use it for this example, is people take like a recipe book and Google their result. Like if
Oh,
this is high,
WebMD
then
it.
what's exactly right?
Yeah.
If this is high, then maybe I'll take this supplement. If this is low, then maybe I'll take this supplement. What does this mean if this is high? And you have this very kind of recipe book approach, but then as you go through 1,000 blood draws, you start to see everything, and you start to see that there is an art to interpretation as well, that I think, to go back to your initial statement, it is purely overlooked. A lot of people don't see what they're looking at, and it's why the value is not the test. The value is the interpretation of the test. So something like albumin is always like a nice easy example. Albumin's a protein that our liver makes, and it's involved in super important things. It's involved in transporting hormones around the body. It's one of the body's most powerful osmotic gradients. So if you're somebody who struggles with edema or water retention, then there may be something going on with albumin. But albumin is this protein in the blood, and in states of chronic dehydration, so it's not an acute marker, but in a chronic dehydration marker, albumin is pulled up. But albumin is also a negative acute phase reactant. So in the presence of inflammation, it is pulled down. So anybody in the audio listening right now, what happens when you pull something up and then pull it back down? It looks completely normal. It's
Yeah.
in the normal reference range, but this person's chronically dehydrated and inflamed, which actually isn't that uncommon. So then you actually have to start seeing these patterns and add the art to the science in order to truly help people with this beautiful objective metric that we all have access to.
Yeah. Hey, team, just a quick reminder that if you are a coach or you're a practitioner and you want to understand the science of true human performance, then you might want to check out the Neuroathletics Coaching Certificate. My company has been running the NAC program for over 2 years now. We've certified almost 500 practitioners around the US. So if you are at the point of your career where you want to understand more about the science, you are giving the nutrition advice, you're giving the sleep advice, you're prescribing the exercise interventions, but there's still more for you to know. That's when the Neuroathletics Coaching Certificate comes in. It's an 8-step system that teaches practitioners how to take their clients from normal to elite, take their clients from feeling fatigued, not getting results, to elite. I always say that the best results in the gym are produced by the people who know the most when it comes to human performance, which you'll learn in today's episode. So if you want to know more, and if you want to be part of the top 1% of coaches and practitioners in the world, then go through and click the link below to find out more about how you can be part of the Neuroathletics Coaching Certificate. I love this. So let's take a bit of a journey together because you work right now with some of the world's best athletes. I know you've got MMA fighters, and you do a really, great elite service with Andy Galpin, who's been on the podcast before. We went into the science of VO2 max testing with Andy. So let's take a more general approach for the general population who may be thinking, well, I don't need to be elite. Now, I've heard you say before that most people are walking around with fake health, which you define as somebody walking around who kind of just feels normal. Is that correct? Is that what you defined as fake health? They
Yeah.
kind of they feel normal, but they don't feel like beaming.
Yeah. It's defining what you want your normal to be, right? So
Okay.
I've got that quick little scale where it's death, fake health, or real health.
Yes.
Death is quite simple to understand. You are deceased. Where I have found in the course of my career is that 90+% of people live in this world that I call fake health, where on paper they don't have a disease, but they have fatigue. They have either constipation or runny stools at times. They don't sleep well. Maybe their libido is low. They don't build muscle and drop body fat efficiently. Maybe they have brain fog and their attention span sucks and they just find themselves looking at their phone all the time. Like this person doesn't have a
That's
diagnosed
right.
disease. But would
Yes.
you want to be that person?
Yes.
No. That people think that health is merely the absence of disease when it's the
Correct.
complete opposite. Health is real health. That's somebody who is the opposite of all those things. They have energy, they have sex drive, they have the ability to go crush their bucket list in the absence of constraints. This is somebody
Mm.
who is out there and getting after it. That final 10% is where I strive to bring everybody who comes my way.
Yeah. Okay. So fake health then is, what most people think is just the absence of disease. We're walking around, doctor hasn't said I've got cardiovascular disease, dementia, or cancer. I'm healthy, but I still wake up and, I've got low libido. And by the way, I'm not speaking about Louisa, Nicola. I'm just giving a general guide here. I kind of feel fatigued. I've got headaches. I'm irritable and low libido. And they just consider this as, well, maybe I just didn't sleep well, or maybe I'm just mad about work. But that's their symptoms, and these symptoms are basically a cry for help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the symptoms are nothing more than the body's only way to communicate with you. That
Mm,
that symptom is your body crying for help. That it's, hey, I need you to pay attention to me right now. And it's your job to be able to identify really what's going on there because there can be so many ways in which a symptom can manifest itself. Like if somebody has indigestion, do they have a stress-induced hypochlorhydria with a reduced stomach acid creation? Do they have a problem with gut bacteria? Do they have like it could be so many different things, and the body only knows symptoms. That's the only
yeah.
way in which it can communicate to you, and your job is to listen to those things and stop acting like what's common is normal. Many people think what's common is normal, but just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal. It is very common for people to have constipation, diarrhea, and poor sleep. But do you think that's normal physiologic functioning? Hell no,
No.
it's not. I think that a lot of people just simply don't understand how good the human body is designed to feel. You are not supposed to have these things every single day. You're not supposed to have a pill to take a poo, and then you're not supposed to have a pill to have energy. And then you're not supposed to take another pill to go to sleep. Like, and believe it or not, 100 years ago, we pooed, had energy, and slept in the absence of this stuff. But
Yeah.
we've progressively relied on this so much more to the point where we have lost this resilience and we've lost this way of identifying what I believe to be true and real health.
Okay, so let's just say somebody's feeling like that. And then they go and do and we'll say for the sake of what you talk about. So you've got this quadrant, you've got blood, stool, urine, hair, right? Most people will be thinking, what the hell? Like, what? Why can't I just get a normal blood sample? Because you just go to your general practitioner more often than not. They're not doing urine, stool, or hair, they're just doing blood work. So why would you marry these four up?
Well, I'll throw saliva in there too. Saliva
Oh, is
has
that
some
five?
validated metrics.
Okay.
Well, I do saliva more than I do hair. So it's
Okay.
very often blood, urine, saliva, stool.
Okay.
And hair can be used in certain unique cases to identify certain heavy metal exposures.
Hmm.
But as far as true, real evidence-based specimen collection, utilizing blood, urine, saliva, stool is an excellent way to go to get a true big picture view of one's physiology. Now, if somebody wants to be a bit more cost efficient, blood work is still absolutely the way to go. And it's because it's so widespread. Like when you're looking at your blood work and you are what you're doing is you're becoming a health detective. You want to, okay, I want to assess my physiology in the same way that a detective would assess a crime scene. So what is a detective going to do? Is he going to jump on the first clue and say, "Man, I solved the case"? He doesn't do that. What he's probably going to do is show up and he's going to look at the crime scene with a very wide lens. Are there any windows around here? Is there anything broken? Is there any cars? What was by here? Is there any kind of scratches? Whatever. Is there clothing? You're going to be looking at absolutely everything and collecting these clues to try and form some form of consensus or create a story behind what happened here. Bloodwork is phenomenal at that because a stool analysis, although very insightful, its value is quite localized within the GI tract.
Mm.
Whereas blood work, its value is localized in any organ that has a blood supply, which is all of them.
All of them.
So that's why in blood work you get brain markers, heart markers, liver markers, kidney markers, gut markers, hormone, immune, micronutrient. Like you kind of name it, you're able to have this widespread detective view of the systemic situation that took place. And then, should you need to dive deeper into any clue and get down on your hands and knees and see what happened on the pavement, then this is when these other kind of lab work assessments can come into play. When looking at specimens such as saliva, urine, stool, or hair, they all provide their own unique value. But again, I couldn't emphasize enough that the value is always in the interpretation and not in the
Yeah.
test in and of itself. But essentially, very long story turned short, when you're looking at somebody and you want to identify real health, a root cause problem can kind of hide anywhere. So that's why I like to look everywhere. When I have my hands on blood, urine, saliva, stool, then I'm getting the full movie of somebody's physiology rather than just a snapshot of it.
Yeah. And I want to go into that and we'll deconstruct a few things so everybody can understand. Let's just talk about a basic lipid panel, for example, and let's include in this. So we've got, total triglycerides, we've got cholesterol, LDL, HDL. Let's include ApoB and LP little a for the sake of it. And by the way, guys, everything I'm discussing now, you can go through and actually search everything I'm talking about in DEXA.ai, which I'm going to link below. It's basically a search engine using AI to help you find the answers to these, because I know some of the things that Dan is saying you're going to want to learn about and know about further after the episode. So Dan, let's say, somebody goes and orders their lipid panel, amongst other things, and they come back and the doctor says, no, you are fine. They've got an LDL of 89, for example. HDL, I'm not sure what the general markers are, and ApoB is within range. Everything is in the green light, and the doctor says you're fine. What do you do then to deconstruct that?
Yeah, so like there's very relevant calculations that you can bring about these things, but then also kind of just a couple of common sense, like, well, yeah. So like, so what I mean by this is like, let's start with the common sense one. Like for example, a common reference range for HDL is just greater than 39.
Okay.
So it could be 917.
Yeah,
Like some of these things, they just simply make no sense,
they don't
and
make
I'm
sense.
baffled as
Yeah,
to why these don't flag.
yeah,
Triglycerides is another one, right? We're just talking lipid panel. There's just less than 100, so I can have
yeah.
zero. I can
Mm,
have no blood. I can have no fat at all in my blood. Like that's not important for anything.
mm.
Like that's a giant flag. It's actually been demonstrated that less than 50 in triglycerides is associated with cardiovascular risk, and less than 40 is associated with autoimmune risk. But then the reference range is just have less than 100. So this is something that is a major problem.
Mm.
Especially if that person say has gut issues too. if somebody has a very low level of triglyceride uptake, or rather triglycerides in the blood, that can be a sign of a malfunctioning gallbladder. Your gallbladder's job, or one of its jobs rather, is to create bile and flow that into the duodenum of the small intestine. Bile emulsifies fats into fatty acids so we can properly uptake them into the lymphatic system and then ultimately into the cardiovascular system. But if we lack bile flow, and bile duct issues are common problems, how people get gallstones. If we lack bile flow, then we will lack emulsification of fats, which means the fats will not be taken up in the lymphatic system and then the cardiovascular system, and then we'll have progressively, quote, great triglyceride levels as they over time begin to get lower and lower. And then you have this weird pain on the right side of your abdomen. You don't know where that came from, and it's because you have gallstones.
Yeah.
These things, they're very preventable, and they're very on first glance, if it's already low, that's an action step for me, is to inquire further, because you could order a stool test at that point and look at fecal fats. If fecal fats are high, then we know that fat digestion and assimilation is not taking place. So then we know that it is a bile flow issue. It's markers creating a type of situation to where me as the detective, I'm like, so actually what's happening here is X, Y, and Z, and you're able to begin formulating a protocol to really help this person moving forward. So like that's like an example to where you can look at something as simple as a lipid panel, but then draw that out into gut health, and then continue to draw that out into other areas of health, because you're now talking about fat utilization in the body, and that would be precursors for hormones that would be used for the synthesis of many different things. So we'll move on from that. That is just one example. HDL is another good example. Like HDL, like I mentioned, it just says greater than 39. Okay. But in men, it has, and this has multiple times been demonstrated, there is a U-shaped risk pattern, just like I'm glad I talked about it at the beginning of the podcast, because for men, HDL, once it starts climbing above 75, risk factors actually begin to go back up. Now, women get away with it from a little longer. Their risk factors tend to go up around 90 or so on the end of that risk curve, but you don't flag for it. So then I always tend to think, it's like one of the best questions I ever asked myself when looking at labs in my career is, I wonder why my body thought that was a good idea. Because that's like, if you can ask that, if you can look at a marker and go, wonder why my body thought that was a good idea. That's like the best question you could ever ask to actually get to the root cause problem of what's taking place. Because your body, from a million years of evolution, is infinitely smarter than you. It was smarter than you 10 times out of 10. So when you see a marker is kind of trending high, that is an adaptation to allostasis. It is adapting to the current allotment of stressors that life has placed upon you. And biomarkers are either going up or down for a specific reason. You got to start questioning, okay, like what else is HDL involved in besides just the management of LDL? Okay, well, it's also involved in glucose management. It's also actually been connected to neutralizing lipopolysaccharides, which are inflammatory gut bacteria. So then you can start, is this being connected? What are the glucose markers looking like on the rest of the lab? Or does this person have any gut symptoms that could possibly be connected to lipopolysaccharides? These are just more things that you can draw out. So those are two things that are, like, say, from the common sense world. But then you start talking ratios as well too, like the LDL to HDL ratio that should be calculated independent of what their absolute values are. Non-HDL cholesterol simply being total cholesterol, subtract HDL, giving you an output of non-HDL cholesterol to see what kind of load that has on your cardiovascular system. Lipoprotein little a, this is something that the reference range is usually from 0 to 75, but you're in a higher risk. It is considered optimal to be less than 18. So these are all many things that as you can see, you and I could probably talk Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 about this kind of stuff. But there's so much more than meets the eye, and just probably the greatest point of value that I could provide there is why did the body think that was a good idea? If you can ask that question, that you are on your way to a real answer.
Yeah, that's actually interesting for vitamin D. I'm going to get to that in a moment, but I just want to stick to LDL. Let's say I'm going to change my my reading and say I got 110. Now, the American Heart Association, correct me if I'm wrong, says they want an LDL less than 99. Is that correct? Less than 100?
That is correct. Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Many people walking around with maybe, let's say, 100 or even 110. And they think, and maybe they're even in their 30s, which is, scary because it's trending as well, as you said. What's the biggest reason as to why someone has a high LDL? Is it simply, okay, you're eating too much saturated fat? That's it.
So it could be a variety of things, right? In my experience, just working with my kind of populations, the people who have the higher LDL are generally due to poor diet and poor body composition. Kind of like the standard things that you would expect. If somebody has a poor diet or if somebody has poor body composition, those are the biggest things that are going to lead to suboptimal LDL. But then you do consider, what is that ratio? An ideal ratio of LDL to HDL is 2-to-1. So if somebody has a 120 LDL, but then they still have a 60 HDL, that actually puts them in the ratio perspective to where the HDL is at a point in unison with the LDL, even though the LDL is classically considered too high. There are many people who would argue that LDL should actually be around 160 in terms of something that would be considered a more accurate risk factor, and that 99 is incredibly conservative in the world of cholesterol. As we've learned more and more and more about it, there's a lot of people that would bump that LDL up, especially if it's in ratio and in unison with HDL. But for the most part, what I've seen in populations striving for performance, body composition and poor diets raise LDL, whereas drug use is what lowers HDL. So those are kind of my unique demographics.
Yeah.
those are the relationships that you'll see.
It's funny because Peter Attia has his benchmarks for below 90 for LDL cholesterol, and he's obviously optimizing for longevity. Now I want to move into something that you said, and that is being a detective and thinking, why did my body think that was a good idea? And I'm going to bring in a personal reference here. For some reason, so I was born and raised in Australia, and I was always in the sun. For some reason, Dan, I just did my blood work. I do it quite regularly. I overlooked vitamin D. I just got my blood work back a week ago. Vitamin D at 24. It's in this, it has a red dot next to it. It's like severely low. Funnily enough, I've spoken about it. I've done solo episodes on the podcast about it. I've written about it. And here I am walking around with a low vitamin D. And I'm very transparent on the podcast. I'm putting it out there. I've heard you say that it is ridiculous and it's nonsense to just go through and just supplement with 5,000 IU of vitamin D. Most people would, okay? It's basically like an equation. You just substitute, okay? Low vitamin D, let's input it. But you've said, hey, let's look at why. You said that maybe lead exposure could be lowering vitamin D.
There's a handful of things that could lower it. And while you were talking, I was actually pulling up a study here.
Yeah.
That
I'm pissed off by that, by the way. Like, I can't believe my vitamin D is so low. And I don't think it's got anything for me to do with the sun.
You look like you're mad at me about it.
Amazing. I'm so mad.
I'm pissed off about this vitamin D right now. Okay?
Well, now I'm going to go do a hair analysis to figure out actually why.
Let's talk about vitamin D for a second, because this is another fascinating one where many things can pull it up and many things can pull it down. So let's just have a nasal breath and bring our pissed offness down just for a quick moment, and we'll talk about vitamin D. So vitamin D, you mentioned lead, okay? So vitamin D is a lot of people don't know, it's also involved in heavy metal retention. So it helps us absorb metals. So when in the presence of lead, it's been demonstrated that our body will auto-regulate to lower vitamin D as a protective mechanism to not uptake more lead. So in the presence of lead, our body forcefully lowers vitamin D as a protective mechanism. So then when it's like, I should take 5,000 IU. That didn't work. I should take 10,000 IU. That thought process alone is just ridiculous to me. It's like, what? It's like, better bump it up. It's like you're taking 10,000 IU. Something else is going on, sir. So that's one thing, right? So that can impact vitamin D. Vitamin D, though, it's also a negative acute phase reactant. Like this one is the literature is out there. This is the paper I pulled up called Vitamin D, a negative acute phase reactant. Okay, let me just read this sentence from the conclusion. Serum vitamin D is a negative acute phase reactant, which has implications for acute chronic inflammatory diseases. Serum vitamin D is an unreliable biomarker of vitamin D status after acute inflammatory insult. Okay,
Oh,
one more
wow.
time. Vitamin D is an unreliable biomarker of vitamin D after acute inflammatory insult. So it is a negative acute phase reactant. So this is something that reduces in the presence of inflammation. It reduces in the presence of lead. It's been demonstrated that it increases in the presence of boron.
Okay.
Glutathione. Glutathione plays a big role in vitamin D metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been demonstrated as well that in people who have low vitamin D, if you give them NAC, which is a precursor to glutathione,
Mm-hmm.
if you give them NAC and not vitamin D increases due to improved glutathione metabolism. So glutathione actually enhances vitamin D in the absence of additional vitamin D supplementation. It's been demonstrated as well that butyrate and one's gut health can improve the conversion of inactive vitamin D 25 serum, which is what we measure, into active 125 vitamin D, which also a lot of people don't measure. They just get inactive 25
Mm.
and then act like that is the active 125 when it's actually not. They're just looking at essentially a vitamin D reserve as opposed to the currently active vitamin D in the body. But that
Yeah.
conversion, a butyrate within the gut, plays a big role in that. Air pollution and bisphenol A. So different types of environmental pollutants, they've been demonstrated to suppress vitamin D. So then you think, it's like, well, I live in California, one of the sunniest states in the United States. I am in the sun all the time and I eat healthy. But am I surrounded by air pollution? I probably am. I'm around millions of people constantly.
Mm.
Could that suppress vitamin D? Probably could. Could I also just have some form of inflammation? Could I have possibly have a plumbing system that is connected to some form of lead? Do I have any kind of glutathione issues at the moment? Magnesium, for the exact same purpose, it's involved in vitamin D metabolism. And again, magnesium supplementation in the absence of vitamin D has been demonstrated to increase vitamin D. So like we're like this is just me riffing here. That was
Mm.
like 6, 7, 8 things that can either pull vitamin D up or pull it down. It's not a stagnant marker. You're not looking at something and then just making a recipe book decision on whether you need more or less of it. Because physiology is a portrait. Everything is connected to everything. That's like you learn that the hard way when you read 1,000 labs and then you make 1,000 mistakes. Is
Yeah.
that everything is connected to everything, and
Mhm.
you find new ways in which the body has checks and balances in
Yeah.
physiology. And then again, I wonder why my body thought that was a good idea. I took 10,000 IU of vitamin D and it didn't move. Should I take 20,000
Yeah.
and force something that my body clearly doesn't want to happen, or should I read some papers? You know, my
In
my moving forward now, I start reading literature at that point. I'm like, hey, something else is going on here that I haven't learned yet.
going back to what you said about the uptake of vitamin D, how it's suppressed, just say you do have lead in your system, okay? And then vitamin D is low because it doesn't want to reuptake that lead. What would happen then if you then were substituting and taking 10,000 IUs per day? That means it would just increase your lead, right?
And reduce your health. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
working against your body rather than with your body.
I
You're
mean,
forcing something that your body does not want to happen.
so this must make you, okay? So you know a million times or 10 million times more than what I do when it comes to this. And I already get mad now around social media, how people are just saying, oh my gosh, I got a low vitamin D. Social media must get you mad if it gets me mad.
It gets me furious. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it does.
It must.
And my face goes red really easy, so I'm just red faced at my computer, just a full tomato head. Just
Yeah.
why is this on social media?
Okay.
It is the worst. Creating absolutist statements is absolutely insane to me in social media. And even creating like these 30-second clips, because even I've been clipped on things that I wouldn't necessarily agree with myself because
Yeah.
it's in isolation with no context. I'm like, man, why'd you create that clip? Because
Yeah.
now everyone's gonna think that I'm some absolutist idiot. But it is crazy to me that people think you can do blood work part time. You can't. Blood work is not something that can be done part time. See a freaking specialist, because the not only I'll add to my statement, because I said previously that the value is not in the lab, the value is in the interpretation. Not only is the value in the interpretation, the danger is also in the interpretation.
Oh, yeah.
You might actually be screwing it up. Okay, if you don't know what an adaptation is and what levers you need to pull and what you actually need to stay away from,
Mm.
then you shouldn't be interpreting your own blood. Period.
It's funny you said that. We get a lot of sponsors reaching out to us for the podcast. And before I take on any sponsor, we don't take on many because I really care about what I'm putting out there. But there was, some form of blood work. And this was actually not too long ago. They came to me and they said, we're going to do your blood work, hormones, everything, and we're going to give you a physician to interpret. I thought, that's great. So I did it, whatever. I've always got a phlebotomist in my place taking blood. Now, when I did the analysis, it was with a chiropractor. Okay, great. It was, he actually knew nothing. I don't think he understood, like, who I
I
was
believe
and
that.
what I did for a living. He just thought maybe I was just Gen Pop, great, just get. And so I didn't obviously say anything. I just let the man do his work, and it was astounding. I
Yeah.
I had to hang the call up. It was meant to go for an hour. I lasted 10 minutes, and I thought, is this the advice you're giving to the general population?
10
So
minutes is fantastic.
yeah, it was fantastic. So evidently they're not a sponsor on the podcast
Yeah.
for several reasons, but it does, make me think why, but even, a regular doctor sometimes it just might be time, right? General practitioners who just got to get them in and then get them out. They don't
Yeah.
have
And
time.
and also expertise. Like if
Yeah.
your goal is in like human optimization, like you want
Mm,
to really push longevity or you want to really push athletic performance. These are different disciplines than disease detection and disease management. It's
mm.
totally and completely different. Like
Yeah.
it's not the same way of thinking, it's not the same way of programming, it's not the same way of like how often should you get your blood redrawn. Like none of these things are really taken into consideration. So they're different disciplines, they're different specialties, different expertise. And the problem though, and what turns Mad Dan into Sad Dan, we talked about Mad Dan, but what makes me sad, Dan, is there's so many good people out there that don't know, and that it annoys me. Is like to in some respect, I don't know. Maybe if you're in the health industry and you're a health professional and you're going with a company that like you're a bit familiar with this stuff, maybe there's a bit of buyer beware there. But what if I am an accountant and I work full time in finance and it's tax season, so I'm working more than full time in finance and I have 3 kids at home. It's not my job to understand
No. Yeah.
phlebotomy. It's not my job to understand how freaking hematopoiesis generates blood from my bone marrow and then ultimately forms different types of this portrait of blood and why it is the way it is. This is incredibly complicated stuff. It's not his job to know that. But then he can flag for something like homocysteine. Homocysteine, its reference range regularly goes up to 18.5. But at 9.47, you flag for cardiovascular risk. At 10, you're technically considered in a state of hyperhomocystinemia. It then becomes an oxidative stress marker. It also, at that point, becomes a hypertension risk. At 11.84, it's an all cause mortality risk. So we've actually surpassed all of those, and now we've tripped an all cause mortality risk before 15, where it becomes a risk for cognitive decline and dementia.
Mm,
Okay, but the
mm.
reference range is regularly going to go up to 18 and a half, and I've actually seen 20 a bunch of times.
You've seen
And
20?
yeah, a bunch of times.
Is
Yeah, the
that with
reference range will
somebody
go
with
up.
an MTFHR gene?
No, sorry, I mean the reference range is going up to 20.
Okay.
So it's not
Oh, okay.
flagging you.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So the reference range is going up to 20. So, and it's this guy could be a beautiful soul. He
Mm,
is an accountant. he has kids, and maybe he coaches his kids' soccer team. And then nobody told him that he tripped off for all these problems. That's what really pisses me off. People deserve to know where they fall in
Mm.
the world of death, fake health, real health. They deserve to know where they fall on the bell curve of life. And I think so many more people would be excited about blood work, and it would be such a more powerful facilitator of change if
Mm.
they freaking knew what they were looking at.
Yeah, that makes me very emotional. Because my grandmother and my aunt was like a second mother to me, and my grandmother, they both died very suddenly of pancreatic cancer, and migrated to Australia from Cyprus, and they didn't really understand anything, and they really relied on their doctor, who, they may have said, I've got a bit of pain here, and the doctor said, yeah, it's fine, just take some paracetamol or whatever, and that's that. So when you talk about it, makes me emotional, because you just never know what a symptom can be, and unless you really care about a patient, it can really save their life to an extent. This is, from diagnosis to, death within 3 weeks. And so it's a scary thing, which is why I'm really passionate about this as well. And okay, so now I want to talk, okay, about something that you've said when it comes to human performance and muscle building. And I remember you saying that there is a reason why you are not losing weight. Let's just say somebody's listening to this and they're trying everything. They've got good diet, good sleep, they're exercising, but they're not losing fat. That again could be a flag for, hey, maybe something else is going wrong. To bring this into full circle, I also had, for some reason, I was borderline high for my cortisol as well, in the presence of low vitamin D. So I'm thinking, am I stressed? Well, okay, I am. I've got an ice bath in my living room, so I don't know how stressed I am. I'm trying to bring down the cortisol levels. But see, that's another thing, understanding cortisol throughout the day through saliva and also through blood.
I love that you use having an ice bath in your living room as an example of why you're a calm person. Yeah,
I'm
my
trying to
cortisol should be
become, yeah.
fine.
It should be fine. I've got an ice bath here. If I could, if the building let me, I'd have a sauna as well.
Yeah, in my most relaxed room of the house, I have it
Yeah.
at 40 degrees, and I should be
Yes.
freaking fine.
Yes. And yet I've still got a high cortisol. Why is that?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right. There's so much to unpack. Like if somebody is lacking in their ability to alter body composition, whether it be building muscle or dropping body fat, there is a why. Especially because I've had so many people come to me like, yeah, Coach Garner, I feel like I'm doing all the right things, man, and I'm just not getting the return on investment that I thought I'd be getting. Like,
Mm.
I believe you. You probably are doing a lot of the right things. You just don't know what's currently underneath the surface that's holding back your ability to maximize the investment that you're placing upon yourself right now. So why don't we do some lab work? Let's look under the hood. Let's see what's going on. And more often than not, I mean, you're gonna find something, because what I've learned is that people can get results way faster than they thought they could, and in a non-markety way. When you have optimized physiology, you don't have things holding back your ability for adaptation. The body is going to adapt to the degree that it is healthy. If your immune system and your hormones and your entire physiology has to utilize certain resources to deal with current stressors, like say that vitamin D problem. It's a good example. You're not going to be able to leverage the power of vitamin D if it's currently being suppressed. And vitamin D, when in adequate amounts, typically between 55 and 80, is that nice sweet spot where you do get
Oh.
maximized body composition, fitness, testosterone for both males and females. It's beneficial in that regard. Bone density, the serotonin, the vitamin D is connected to so many positive things, but you're not going to be able to leverage the power of that in the presence of hidden stressors that are currently going undetected because you just simply haven't taken the time to get the lab work to see what's going on. So if somebody is struggling to drop body fat, they often try to utilize outside in solutions for inside out problems. It's not illogical either, because they're like, well, if I want to drop body fat, I'm going to train more and I'm going to eat less. That is not an illogical thought pattern at all, because they want to increase their energy out and reduce their energy in. That's the beauty of thermodynamics. That's going to work until it stops working and it becomes an inadherable approach. Like, for example, there's case studies in the literature that I've cited, where a zinc deficiency in a female volleyball player, I believe it was, she had a zinc deficiency, and upon repletion of her zinc status, her RMR increased 900 calories in 4 months. 900 calories of
That's
purely
huge.
RMR. That's gigantic. So can you
Wow.
imagine being that girl though, and how brutal your calorie deficit would have to be, and
Yeah.
how much nobody would believe you that you're
Mm.
following the plan?
Mm-hmm.
No one would believe her. And
Mm.
she would be dying on such little calories to try and finally enter a deficit. But zinc is so connected with T4 and T3 formation in the thyroid that it impacts metabolism to that degree. So that's like a giant one where like that simple restoration, and the data on how many people are low in zinc is
Mm.
not hard to find. A
Mm.
lot of people are very, very low in zinc, similar to numbers like magnesium. People are very, very low in magnesium in many different demographics and even fully developed areas. It's something that a lot of people are just simply low in. So that's something that could dramatically impact metabolic rate. But in turn, like, not just fat loss, like that's also energy. Zinc is also connected to wound healing. Zinc is also very important for immune function. So now she's not just fatigued and not dropping body fat, but her recovery is very slow because her immunity is on the floor from having this low amount of micronutrient. So like that's a giant one. And there's many other examples. If you have hormone issues, if you lack iron, which is another not a uncommon one in females to lack iron, or certain populations who run certain more extreme approaches to dietary intake, they may be low in iron status. But iron is very important for the formation. We go from hematopoiesis, which is the formation of all blood from our bone marrow, but then that can branch off into erythropoiesis, which is the formation of red blood cells. And then this is going to require iron for you'll pick it up in many markers: mean corpuscular hemoglobin, MCH, hemoglobin in and of itself, serum iron. These things are all there to represent iron status because it's very important. A big role of it is that it delivers oxygen around the
Mm.
body. Iron is an oxygen carrier, so that our red blood cells can carry oxygen, say in the context of athletics or training, to working muscle tissue. Now, we talk about losing body fat as in burning body fat, but from a biochemistry perspective, you know that this is beta oxidation,
Yeah.
emphasis on oxidation.
Mm.
If we don't have
Mm-hmm.
optimal oxygen deliverability, we are going to lack oxygen at the mitochondria for the purpose of forming ATP out of fatty acids. So we are going to have a state of fatigue, which is going to limit our ability to drop body fat, which is ultimately going to hurt our outcome goal. So if
Yeah.
I had an outside in solution, I'd want to do more cardio. But
Mm.
if I had an inside out solution, I would actually restore iron status in the body, feel like $1,000,000, and then go kill my training and get the body I was actually after and the performance that I was actually after. So these
Yeah.
things, it's very low. Bloodwork sounds like this giant thing sometimes, and maybe that's my fault sometimes with the long-winded explanations. But it's like there's an iceberg of science to understand underneath the water. But the application there was take iron. And then that person is going to feel way better having done so.
Yeah. So basically, you have to be healthy to exercise well and to get the biggest bang for your buck. You have to be healthy to sleep well. You have to be healthy to just maintain, so it's funny because you're right. Most people would be like, oh, I need to lose weight. So I'm just going to, that's it. I'm just not going to eat dinner. I'm just going to cut, 1,200 calories
Yeah,
from my diet, when it does seem ludicrous when you say this. Brings up another point. How many times have you heard the word chronic fatigue?
a lot, a lot.
Is that a
Yeah,
thing? Is that real?
uh,
Is that like adrenal
it, it
fatigue?
it's a real symptom.
Okay.
I'll say that fatigue is certainly a real symptom, but where that can stem from is very multifactorial. So like that could be a lack of iron, because you will absolutely have fatigue in the presence of suboptimal iron. Candida, an actual fungal overgrowth, one of their primary symptoms is fatigue. So if you are somebody who struggles with yeast issues, or if you are somebody who has an actual fungal growth problem that is currently going undetected, and you've got lots of gastrointestinal symptoms, the hallmark symptom of that is fatigue. You can have purely just a bad diet. I think that has to be in there as well. I think that there's also people that you don't properly utilize low hanging fruit like deloads, like active recovery periods. They don't actually periodize training. They kind of just exercise as opposed to have a periodic and phasic approach to their training that manages fatigue before fatigue even becomes fatigue.
Mm.
That's something that is outside in, but is something that you can certainly hang your hat on. Also, from a fatigue perspective, like low testosterone, and I can't
Mm.
emphasize enough. Testosterone is typically always seen as very male, but it is absolutely female. Just as estrogen is male. We both use these hormones for many reasons, but they're just deemed these certain things for no reason. We both have them in our physiology for a reason, and they can both lead to fatigue issues. So those are all things that can lead to fatigue. But then you also have kind of like backdoor stuff. Like if you have a thyroid problem, thyroid is going to regulate energy metabolism. So if you have say a lack of T4 to T3 conversion in the liver, then you can run into fatigue through the back door, because it's kind of like a double back door, because like you first think that you just have a caffeine deficiency, and then when that doesn't
Yeah.
work to overcome your fatigue,
Yeah.
and you go from 200 to 300 to 400, you might have lower thyroid,
Yeah.
or increased TSH on your panel. And you might think it's very thyroid focused, but then
Mm.
you start reading and you learn about the thyroid liver connection. So it becomes kind of like a double backdoor thing. So that can hold back fatigue. You can have low DHEA. Many
Mm.
people associate DHEA with its protective factors, because it's like DHEA. Like if I may take a moment to be an even bigger nerd than I already am,
Please
DHEA
do,
is like
because
one
I
of my
also had low DHEA.
oh, it's my favorite hormone. It's my favorite
Oh,
one.
well, I
That's
was
how
going to
much
go
of a
into
nerd I
hormones
am.
after this. Yeah.
The DHEA is one of my favorite hormones because it's so under discussed. DHEA is our resiliency factor to cortisol. Like when you see hormonal panels, or hormone metabolism branched out in textbooks, you're going to see that everything comes from this thing called pregnenolone, which is like the mother of all sex hormones, because you need it to make anything. If you want to make estrogens, if you want to make DHEA, if you want to make testosterone, androstenedione, progesterone, cortisol, they all come from pregnenolone. Even aldosterone, which regulates our electrolytes, this is all coming from pregnenolone. And then, if due to evolutionary biology, in the presence of stress, we will be prioritizing the formation of cortisol in the absence of DHEA, because cortisol is seen as a survival hormone. This is something that is there for the purpose of fight or flight. It's there to deal with stress issues. There to deal with problems, and it's very excitatory for that reason. So it's something that can impact sleep, which also can impact fatigue in the long run. But the more and more we prefer this cortisol pathway, the less and less DHEA we make. And then we progressively reduce something called DHEA sulfate over time. So you can measure free DHEA in your saliva, which is free, readily available DHEA, ready to rock and roll and bind to any receptor you need to have its beneficial effect. But then you also have DHEA sulfate, which is like the reserve of DHEA in the body. You can think about it like a tank of DHEA in the body that your body's going to use on an as needed basis. It's basically going to grab this DHEA sulfate, it's going to shoot it over to the liver so the liver can do a cool thing called sulfation, which removes the sulfate molecule from the DHEA, and ta-da, you've got your free DHEA. But your cortisol, and this is like super valuable for people to know, the cortisol to DHEA sulfate ratio, this is serum blood cortisol to serum DHEA sulfate, should be between 0 and 0.09. That's what that ratio should be, between 0 and 0.09. Now, it sounds like a weird ratio, but those are absolutely the numbers. When you start to exceed, once you start to get to 0. 0.1, 0.11, 0.12, once this begins to exceed and you have more cortisol than you do DHEA, this is when you're losing many different things that you can unpack, which again, you and I could talk about like from 9 to 5. I'll provide a couple of examples that I think the audience will find cool. One having to do with getting jacked, and the other having to do with being smart. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so first off, cortisol is highly catabolic. whereas
Mm-hmm.
DHEA is highly anabolic. So what I've done a lot in my practice is utilize the cortisol to DHEA sulfate ratio to formulate my own catabolic to anabolic ratio of the body.
Okay.
And this is like a cool, this is basically where hard gainers live. Hard gainers, that's not a thing, that doesn't exist. People will be mad about me about for that, but I don't care. I've made a lot of hard gainers jacked. And what happens in this case is it's not the calories that your body is taking in. It's the physiology that those calories are going into that's going to determine the
Oh yeah.
anabolic potential of your diet. So, like, let's say you have two biological twins.
Mm-hmm.
They are on the exact same training program and the exact same diet, okay? And they're twins, exact same genetics. But you give one of them steroids. Who's going to get better results? The one on steroids. He's
Mm-hmm.
going to get better results 10 times out of 10. They're on the same diet and training program, but his
Mm-hmm.
physiology is different. Okay? That matters. It's
Mm-hmm.
not the calories that are going into your body, it's the physiology that those calories are going into that is
Yeah.
going to determine the anabolic potential of your diet. Okay? This is why cortisol is connected to cortisol to DHEA sulfate is connected to catabolism. It is also an overtraining marker. It is also a marker for immune function. This ratio is connected to all of these things that are highly either anabolic or catabolic, depending on what side of the equation you're on. So if you want to be jacked and you want to avoid overtraining, this is the ratio to actually be very in tune with and something to monitor probably quarterly.
But what else brings down DHEA other than cortisol?
Something that can bring down DHEA that I've found is if somebody actually uses hormone replacement therapy.
Mm.
So if somebody is on, say, testosterone, it's actually quite valuable for them to also be on DHEA because
Mm.
DHEA is a precursor for testosterone.
Mm.
So if you are now having an exogenous source of testosterone, your body's the ultimate efficiency machine. It's not going to make as much of this previous precursor that it needed to formulate on its own because you're already getting an exogenous source of this thing that it was used for already. So that's actually a big thing that I've seen push it down before is
Yeah.
exogenous hormone use and chronic stress. And if you combine those two things together, you have very low DHEA.
Interestingly, I started supplementing with it. Okay. Because naturally, so
I
25
love it.
milligrams.
Yep.
Now I'm going to move into sleep. Okay. I track my sleep. I've got an Oura ring. I'm very big on sleep. I have always, oh, not always, probably in the last year, my REM sleep has been surprisingly at around 15%. And it's been upsetting. I'm like, why is it at 15%? And then I've always had like probably like 30% of deep sleep, which is great. Now, DHEA came into the equation 5 days ago. REM sleep has shot up to 30%, but deep sleep now is down at 13%. Never happened to me. And now I'm like, are they antagonistic? Like, what is going on here?
I've never actually seen that. So I wouldn't have a
Yeah.
good answer for you, unfortunately. I pulled up a paper while you were talking because this is something I use in my practice.
Yeah.
People can check this out. DHEA, this is the title of the paper. DHEA administration increases rapid eye movement, sleep, and EEG power in the sigma frequency range. So DHEA is something. This is a paper. It's already out
Yeah.
there
It's
that
already
helps
out there.
increase. It's already out
Okay.
there, and it helps increase REM sleep. So,
Mm,
like you saying that, I love when stuff like that happens
yeah.
because it's that you're getting clinical correlation with
Yeah.
current data. It's like, bam, baby,
So
we
the
get
literature's
it.
not
So,
lying.
yes, it's not lying to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
So this, and this is could be a cool thing too because DHEA, yeah, it helps you get jacked, but it also helps you be smarter because DHEA has been demonstrated to actually protect the hippocampus
Mm,
from oxidative stress induced damage from cortisol. So cortisol has been demonstrated to create oxidative stress to the hippocampus of the brain, which is the memory center of the brain. So this is where we're storing memories, as I'm sure you know. It's something I don't need to tell you. But we're storing memories in the hippocampus, and cortisol actually creates oxidative stress to the hippocampus, but not in the presence of DHEA, which is a super, super cool finding. This is a paper I have on hand right here, actually.
yeah. That
Let me just, DHEA protects hippocampal cells from oxidative stress induced damage. The title of the
damn.
paper, people can check that out. It's very,
We'll
very
link that below
eloquently
too.
written.
Yeah.
Yeah. super cool stuff where, and it's kind of crazy. It's like it's almost as if like no matter how high you push cortisol, so long as you have adequate DHEA, your brain remains protected. So it's like a cool way to protect your brain, but then also get jacked at the same time, which kind of sounds a whole lot like stress management to me,
Mm.
which is maintaining that
That's
DHEA in the
unbelievable.
presence of cortisol.
That
Yeah.
doesn't explain the deep sleep and
No,
why
I've got
that's
no good
suddenly gone
answer for
down.
that.
Yeah.
I bailed on that answer.
What? Dan, you usually know everything.
I don't know. No. I just bailed.
No.
I found I was a good bail though. You got to admit
Yeah.
that.
So, okay. And then I just wanted to kind of also touch on, why do you think we currently have a global epidemic of low testosterone, which testosterone deficiency, I believe in America, is defined as 300 nanograms per deciliter below, less than?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that we've got a global deficiency in testosterone. I actually think in a big way because of sedentary behavior.
Mm.
I know that I'm typically known as like the nutrition and lab guy, but when I sit down and I think in terms of ROI on okay, the population as a whole, what they're going to need to do something easier, and it's going to have to not take a lot of time, and it's going to have massive ROI. And
Mm.
when I think about that, besides popping a pill, when I think about that, I think about 2 total body resistance training sessions per week. If you just imagine the kind of changes you'd see in someone's physiology if somebody was sedentary and overweight, and all you asked them to do was 2 total body resistance training sessions per week, not even high volume, that person right away would have better inflammation management. They would have better cortisol metabolism because resistance training improves cortisol metabolism. They would have way better insulin sensitivity for the purpose of improving blood sugar control. They would have a psychological outlet for a lot of
Yeah.
things that are currently bothering them. They would create a little bit more fatigue throughout the day, which would increase sleep drive and help them get a
Mm.
better sleep at nighttime from it as well. It would help them build muscle. And when you're looking at stuff like longevity and you're looking at bone density, you're looking at leg strength, you're looking at grip strength, these these things are very resistance training based. Like there's just so many things that I find connected to sedentary behavior. So
Mm.
like and my passion and what I'm most known for is like lab work and nutrition. But holy, in terms of ROI, getting out for a couple of resistance training sessions per week, and then
Mm.
combining that with something simple, like I absolutely love walking my dog.
Mm.
I actually think that's like one of the best health hacks, believe it or not, is to
Yeah.
get a dog. It really, because you got to walk it every day, so your step count goes up. It's like the most oxytocin ever because when I'm
Yeah.
walking my golden retriever, it's my favorite thing in the world. But then also, it forces you to get in the sunlight.
Yeah.
So then you get this walk, you get sunlight, you get happiness. You're not looking at your phone for that half hour. It's super simple things, and I think, and this will be the clip, my 10-second clip. Golden retrievers increase testosterone. That's what will be clipped
We're going to
up.
get that. The editors are going to put that together.
Yeah, golden retrievers increase testosterone, but in a real sense, I think that there is a global testosterone deficiency. People's diets suck, people's body composition sucks, and people's sedentary behavior sucks.
Yeah.
That's just, and it's almost an adaptation. Like you could almost make the argument that it's an evolutionary adaptation because we needed testosterone when we were hunting and gathering, and there were periods of famine, so then we needed to have aggression to go out there and get someone else's food or go hunting or do. There was a need for almost an excess and a drive for that beyond reproduction.
Mm.
Reproduction now is kind of what people need now because you don't need to freaking do anything now.
Yeah.
You can order your groceries. Like you don't even have to go to the grocery store. You
Mm.
don't have to literally do anything ever. So the body, as the ultimate evolutionary and the ultimate adaptation machine and the ultimate efficiency machine, why would it produce a
Yeah.
bunch? Even though we
Yeah.
feel better and we look better and we perform better, as a society, as a hive, we're kind of moving towards sedentary behavior. And I want to plant my flag in the ground and say I'm not joining the hive,
Yeah.
but I can see why statistical norms are going down because I think that's just where we're going.
And I know you work with a lot of men, but do you work with women as well? And the reason I ask that as a backup question is your thoughts on fertility, because I know a lot of women who, mid 30s, late 30s, who, having trouble conceiving. And then once they just pick this, maybe they do go and most doctors are like, but you're fine. Blood work is fine. If you just keep going, you will just get it. It's funny because my grandmother, who had many kids, but accidentally fell pregnant like when she was 42 and then 43 and then 44 again. Like, she was fine. She just accidentally fell pregnant back then. It's like now, but like women in their early 30s are struggling to fall pregnant. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah. I would also be hard pressed to not blame the men for that. I really would.
I agree. Yeah.
I really would. Sorry, dudes, but with how low men's libido is right now, and this again, don't this data is out there with how low men's libido is now compared to what it used to be, how low people's testosterone is, how low sperm counts have gotten.
Okay. Or take men out
Both
of the
sides
equation.
take men purely out of the equation.
Yeah.
In terms of pure female fertility, I don't think I would have a whole lot to say on the topic. I really wouldn't.
Okay.
I think that in a big way, probably stress management would be a giant thing. I think that that's something that's going to play a role in certainly papers I've come across in the past. But I think fertility would just be so individualized. I'd be hard pressed to come across any kind of protocol that I could talk about on a podcast.
Yeah. No, it's quite fascinating because there's just so much in endocrinology and reproductive health that we are still not understanding.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like probably like a lot of that purely has to do with the ebbs and flows of the cycle and how
Mm,
that can be disrupted. Like you're going to
mm,
have your follicular phase is characterized by the increase in estrogen. You're going to have the LH and FSH surges around the drop of the egg and ovulation in days 13 to 15. You're going to have the luteal phase immediately after that, say from day 18 to 28. A typical cycle length is considered normal if it's days 28 to 35. So it is almost like I think you could certainly make the argument that stress induced amenorrhea is
mm,
something that can certainly play a role in someone's impact of fertility. Over exercise is something that's going to play a role in fertility, which is something a lot I'm very familiar with the female athletes. I've worked with tons of gymnasts. I've worked with a lot of UFC fighters. I've worked with
mm,
female hockey players. A lot of them simply training holds them back. But then also, I've worked with females who have certain body image issues as well and consume, it's like chronic dieting, like almost as if dieting is a lifestyle, living in hypocalorism. And that's just
mm,
simply not going to, if your body, again, being the ultimate efficiency machine, it can't create something out of nothing. So it's going to have a very hard time developing a new person if you don't even have enough energy to fulfill your own current needs in terms of caloric intake. So I think things that manipulate estrogen into follicular phase, things that impact progesterone in the luteal phase, things that impact stress or hypocalorism or overactivity. These are probably the big rocks that actually have a giant role in all of
mm.
this. And each of those, in terms of progesterone and estrogen, could be talked about at length. But anything beyond that would be super specific fertility stuff.
So you're doing all of your work now currently at, is it Rapid Health or
I'm
Biomolecular?
involved in I'm involved in so many companies. That's
Okay.
I don't want to look at my cortisol right now.
No, because if
I'm in,
what if someone wants to come and do their, analysis with you?
yeah, that's definitely the spot to go. So if you're interested in the lab, the coaching component of what I do, you would go to rapidhealthreport.com. It's the premium service. So that's basically where if you want to get the pro athlete experience, you go to Rapid Health Report because we basically turn you into the ultimate science experiment. There is nothing you don't know about your body when you're done the rapid, we call it the
That's
decoding
scary.
process. We decode your physiology, over 500 biomarkers between blood, urine, saliva, stool, completely taking the guesswork out of your programming so you only get exactly what you need. So
Mm,
that's like a very big component of something I'm doing right now in terms of a coaching perspective. But a real giant passion project for me is something I'm working on right now, which will have a launch date in January 2024, is Labwork interpretation software. So this is something that
yes. I want to be your
Yeah.
first customer. If you're selling this, yeah, I'm your first
Hey,
customer.
I'll hook you up. We're gonna do some beta stuff real soon, so
Oh,
you can get in
please.
early.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is something where I've been involved in lab work for 10 years, and I wouldn't make something if I didn't know it was going to be the best. I know what everybody's doing, and I know that I've got a real edge here. So
Mm,
I'm going to be launching a Bloodwork software in January 2024, and it's going to handle absolutely everything for people in a scalable way. I've been asked so long, like, hey, can I work with you? Like, there's a reason on my Instagram post it never says like accepting new clients now,
yeah.
or there's spots that
Yeah.
I never have any of that.
Yeah.
I just post because it's a very time expensive process, my coaching. And I've always been asked, like, how can we scale what you do? And this is finally that answer. And this is what I want my legacy to be. I think
Mm,
that I can change Bloodwork forever with this thing, because it's incorporating the science of interpretation, but also the art of interpretation. Like that albumin example that I talked
mm,
about previously, all these patterns in relationships, it's controlling for all of that. So you're not just getting high lows, and you're also not just getting optimal, not optimal. You're getting high, low, optimal, not optimal ratios, calculations, patterns, relationships, predictable outcomes, past, present, future of your physiology. You're being graded on all these different categories, and there are outputs for training, lifestyle, nutrition, and supplementation. So it's taken a lot of work and a long
mm.
time to put together, but that's gonna be ready, and I cannot freaking wait. I feel like
I
an old
cannot freaking
grandma.
wait. I'm like
I feel
so
like
excited.
I feel like an old grandma who just finished like
Yeah.
Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm putting it on the table and I'm looking for everyone's reactions. I'm looking around the table hoping everyone likes it. That's what I'm
Oh
like
my
right now.
gosh. I'm
Yeah.
sure everyone's going to love it because you are definitely one of a kind. I tell everyone, like, I don't know another person who's as knowledgeable as you are in this. So thank you so much,
Thank you so
Dan
much.
Garner, for coming on the Neuro Experience podcast. I'm going to link all of your socials below, your Instagram and everything else.